I want to start just by noting the unique character, which is Frank Pack, and to note that this is a lecture that really is built around a remarkable scholar at Pepperdine University. And so I'll let you read the bio and the pamphlets that you have, but note that this was a distinguished professor of religion, a really accomplished scholar. He served at multiple Christian universities, but he also preached throughout his career. He did all those things that it takes to accomplish at that level and was a minister at the same time. And so I'm so thrilled that we're honoring him with this lecture series and the remarkable group of speakers that we've had over the years. Especially excited today as a fellow scientist, I get to celebrate Deborah Haarsma today. This is a deep honor for me, and I'm excited to introduce her to you today. And she's done a great job of introducing components, and I'll repeat some of those, so forgive me for that, but they really deserve this extra attention. But I'm excited to hear under the title of Ancient Faith Meets Modern Science, Following Christ in Today's Debates. What a fundamental, important conversation. So Deb is currently the executive director of the International Network for Christian Higher Education. She introduced that a moment ago. Very famously, she was the president of BioLogos for about a decade. And I want to note that that is a group really devoted to gathering Christian communities together with the scholarly community to talk about a place of friction, which is the life of the mind and the life of the heart and the spirit, talking about things that matter, right? So I think all of us in communities at universities have moments where we're with our churches and it's like, I don't think we're on the same page on that subject. And it might be the age of the universe, it might be something else. Those are really important conversations. It's not, I reject you as a brother or sister in Christ. It's, I want to understand you better because you're a great astrophysicist and you believe the data that you're seeing, and yet it doesn't draw you away from faith. How does that work? So that's really Deb Haarsma in a nutshell with regard to her influence. But I want to give you a quote from Francis Collins, former director of NIH. He's a textbook level scientist, very famous scientist. I think many of you would know that name, referencing Deb Haarsma. So this is high praise from a really remarkable speaker and leader in the scientific community. She has led, talking about BioLogos, with a winsome and Christ-like spirit, committed to gracious dialogue. Countless lives have been touched and changed. I will always be deeply grateful for her leadership. I'm so proud of that quote. I think she's probably seen it before, but that is high praise from a very influential scientist. So again, she is here with Loren, her husband. There he is. I very much enjoyed meeting you today, Loren, for the first time. Both professors at Calvin, Deb Haarsma, former professor and chair of the Department of Physics and Astronomy at Calvin. Her book, Origins, I think is on many of the tables, a really important book. It's a great book, and she has been an author and editor of a number of other books. So I want to mention just faith and science briefly, and then I will get out of the way, Deb. I don't want to babble too much, but I am excited to introduce you. I will note that as a scientist, to talk about faith and science is one of those truly, I would say, that is sacred space for conversation with a student. And I'm looking for Gerard Fossil in the room. I don't see him, but one of our physicists. He and I'm across the hallway. I know I see John, there are physicists. Chris is here. My lab is across the hallway from physicists, so I'm a biologist. And Gerard and I used to talk about when he would take students in his class up on the mountains of the Santa Monicas to look at the stars. And my question, you can probably predict it. Gerard, have you ever been up there with a group of students at midnight looking through the telescopes at stars that are far away and you don't get to the big questions at some point? It's not about memorizing who's who, what's named what, but it's the big meaning and purpose type questions. Are the students not in awe of what they're seeing? And really, it is humbling to look at the magnitude of what's above. And he's like, it's a rare thing to get back in the van and come back without a big conversation. And that makes me happy. I'm glad that I'm in university that happens, but that is us. I would say as a biologist, when you get down to the idea that life is written upon an actual code, right? A secret code written on a molecule, a long stringy molecule called DNA, that on that molecule within its three-dimensional structure is a code that tells you how to build a living cell. that will give you pause, right? If you really think about that, there's a message written on a molecule that tells us how to build a living thing. That's when the non-believer has a moment, I would say. They're like, wow, how is this possible? How did this come about? But I want to just note, I'm almost done, Deborah, that she has devoted so many years to being a true ambassador for this conversation. She is on the short list of people that we've had at Pepperdine, such as Francis Collins, who's been here, Jennifer Wiseman, another astrophysicist that spoke so eloquently a few years ago at our presidential inauguration. But stepping into the conversation, the dialogue between faith and science, and extending it into communities of faith. That is the big step. Deb Haarsma has guided us into those conversations. So I will end with one verse, one of my favorite. Actually, it's a passage, Romans 1. Well, nope, I'm going to skip that one. That's a great one too. Psalm 19. I don't want to, those extra 30 seconds, I don't want to, but this is one of my favorites, Psalm 19, and I think it really does set the stage for our conversation. Psalm 19, verses 1 and 2. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they reveal knowledge. Professor Deb Haarsma.
Can you hear me all right? Sounding good. Okay. It is an honor to be here. Thank you for that introduction, Jay. It's an honor to be selected as the Frank Pack Lecturer among so many distinguished theologians. So when I was invited, I was eager to come and see Pepperdine. I've never been here before, and we've had a lovely time, especially meeting a lot of the science faculty and students. It's been great. And then coming to Malibu at the end of a long, cold, snowy winter in Michigan, twist my arm. It was a very easy invitation to say yes to. And then when I learned it was during Calvin's spring break and my husband could come with me, we definitely we rearranged things so that we could be here. So I'm an astronomer, and I love galaxies. Spiral galaxies like this one are stunningly beautiful objects in the heavens, made of billions of stars. And we didn't even know these existed before modern telescopes. In my research, I studied galaxy clusters, and that's when hundreds or thousands of galaxies will be in the same spot. And this is one of my favorite pictures of a galaxy cluster. You can see so many different kinds and colors of galaxies, different shapes. These are some of the most massive objects in the universe. And I was always filled with a sense of wonder as I studied these. This is one of my favorite pictures from the Hubble telescope. Now, if you ask a lot of scientists, they'll have a passion about what they study. At dinner last night with the science faculty, every one of them said, oh, and this is what really excites me. I love studying this for this reason. But of course, it's not just scientists. There was a survey last year that asked Americans, do you feel a sense of wonder about the universe? And they got a lot of positive answers. And you know what? The answers were the same across all religious and political groups. Wonder is not polarized. Yay. It's something we share, this response to the beauty in the universe. Now, for those of us who are Christian, the heavens are declaring the glory of God, as we just heard. Not their own glory, but the glory of the one who made them. And so when we build scientific explanations for how galaxies work, we're not replacing God. We're building these tools that show and reveal the glory of God. I see science, modern science, working beautifully with ancient Christian faith, working hand in hand. But a lot of people in our culture see that science and faith are opposed in various ways. So, for example, in this question, they asked, is science doing more good than harm in American society? And they split out the answers by religious and self-identified religious group. And you can see the atheists here, 85% said yes, they have a strongly positive view of science. But the lowest number here is from the evangelical Protestants at 39%. And both of those numbers are heartbreaking for me, really, because the people who share my positive view of science also don't know the creator who's behind it. And those who share my faith are also the most suspicious of science. Ah, what's going on here? I've been following the science and faith conflict for decades. The conversations have never been easy, but in the last 10 to 15 years, even in the last 2 years, they feel like they've gotten harder and in different ways. And that set me down a path to try to understand that better. What are the views out there, not just the sound bites? And how can we address this better? And I discovered there's a lot of research on this. And so I want to share that with you today. I'm going to be focusing on American culture. These issues play out and have interesting echoes around the world in different institutions. I'm working now with the International Network for Christian Higher Education. I'm seeing how these issues play out in other countries. But for today, I'll just focus on the US. So how do we follow Christ in this conflict? This is not just a question for scientists and theologians. This is a question for all of us. As citizens, as Christians, how do we follow Christ? So for me, as a citizen, I love America. I want what's best for it. I would love there to be more mutual respect, more collaboration on issues. And as a Christian, I love the church. I want what's best for it. And I think handling science well can really help the church in our core ministries, to be able to do evangelism to people who are science-minded, to be able to disciple young people for a science and tech-intensive world, to be able to use the tools of medicine to care for the sick. All of these things help the core mission of the church. So today I want to help you to understand the landscape of the science and faith conflict, give you an overview of that, and then delve into both those skeptical of faith and those skeptical of science to understand better their concerns. I am sure we have a range of views in this room. Even though most of us are here at Pepperdine, there's probably differing faith commitments, probably different views on science issues that I'm going to raise. But that's okay. I'm hoping wherever you are at that you'll have a better understanding of views that others hold and feel better equipped to stay in conversation. This talk is based on a paper that has just been accepted in the journal Perspectives on Science and Christian Faith. And if you'd like a preprint, just let me know. Okay, so first point, topics in the science and faith conflict. What are we talking about here? There's actually several topics where these intersect. A big one you're probably already thinking of is the age of the earth and evolution. And those have been around for hundreds of years and have been top of mind for Christians seeking to understand how science and the Bible go together. I would say in the last 10 to 15 years, as I travel around the country, I'm meeting people and seeing places where those issues are not as big of a deal as they used to be, just not front of mind, but there's other places where they're still just top of mind as the #1 science and faith issues. In the 90s and aughts, we had the new atheists, Richard Dawkins, Jerry Coyne. You have these top scientists who were saying quite loudly, oh, God is a delusion. Science has disproved God. Those voices in the last 15 years have kind of faded in prominence. You don't hear them as often, but their ideas are still filtering around. I will hear them from atheist scientists who will be echoing those things. So they're still with us. And now we have climate change. The impacts of climate change, we're feeling more and more. That is increasing in recent years, and the politicization around it is also very strong. But then we had COVID. Suddenly, vaccination is a highly polarized issue with faith dynamics when it was not nearly as much before that. And now just in this administration, suddenly government funding of science has become politicized. That used to be one of the least polarized topics in Congress. Funding science was agreed on by parties, and now it is not. And then there's artificial intelligence. What is that going to do? The impacts of that are still, could go in many directions. Okay, nothing big here. And you're probably thinking she's going to address all of that. Yes, I will solve all of these problems in the next hour. No, I'm not going to solve everything, but there are interesting threads that run through a lot of this that I think can help us have deeper insights. So you might be feeling a little anxious about all of this at once, but just hang with me. I think we'll get through it. So those are the topics and how they've been changing. The polarization has also been getting worse, and we've all been living through this, so you know this well. Let me just name a few things. Truth has become a point of debate. It used to be we agreed on the facts and debated about what to do about them, but now we don't have that common ground anymore. Social media has intensified siloing. We are just hearing our own viewpoints, confirmation bias, and it amplifies loud voices and it feeds you the views that get you most emotionally positive or negative, and it's really made all of our polarization so much worse. There's another dynamic that people are don't hear named as often, and that is that our political identities have become our primary identities. So this is an interesting sociological finding going back to 2017. It used to be before that people's primary sense of self was around their religion or race or ethnicity, usually one of those things. But now for the majority of people, it's become their political identity. And for religious people, that's often very tied together. These religious and political identities have become very intertwined. So that leads us to a very toxic combination, all of this together. This is why things have gotten so hard. Now, you may be thinking, this is the politicians' fault. Well, yes, definitely. The extreme voices out there are making it all worse and not modeling for a civil engagement or things that could help us get through some of these hurdles. But what I want to talk about is that politicians are usually tapping into dynamics that are out there. Why is their message resonating? What is it about the views of American people that are causing these views to be amplified? So that's what I want to focus on. All right, so let's talk about engaging those skeptical of faith. So there was a survey a couple years ago that asked US teens and adults with no religious affiliation, do any of the following cause you to doubt Christian beliefs? And they could pick from this list, and the most popular answer was the hypocrisy of religious people. Well, yes, that also bothers me, and so that was a very common answer. The next answer was science. And that, I think people are less aware of, that is so front of mind for many people of no religious affiliation. So I'll come back to hypocrisy in a minute, but what is it about science? Some surveys from a little bit longer ago say that young people are concerned about science and the church because the church seems to reject much of what science tells us about the world, or churches are out of step with the scientific world we live in. So they're seeing a conflict between church and science among young people. So that could be maybe what's driving some of this answer. The people of no religious affiliation, often they have been religiously affiliated and are now choosing not against it. Or it could be coming from these new atheist voices that I was mentioning. Those ideas are out there. The secular world has absorbed the idea that science supports atheism. Now, actually, both of these are missing it because Christian theology actually gives an amazing foundation for how and why we do science. So I'll stay on this slide a minute if you're the kind who wants to take a picture of the slide. On the left, we have worldview beliefs necessary for science. And so scientists come from many different worldviews. They might be atheist or Christian or Jewish or Hindu or agnostic, but we all agree on certain foundational beliefs that are not in science itself. Beliefs that a value of curiosity about the natural world, belief that nature is comprehensible, a view that nature operates with regular, repeatable, universal patterns that we can investigate, that we have to be humble, at least in this particular way, in that our scientific theories, we have to always correct them against the data. What is coming from the natural world? Many scientists are also motivated by service, using medicine or technology to meet human needs. These are not foreign to Christianity. On the right, I have a list of Christian theological beliefs grounded in scripture that give the basis for these worldviews. So as a Christian walking into science, we are curious because we're gifted and called by God to study God's handiwork. We believe nature is comprehensible because we're made in God's image, so we can think God's thoughts after him. We believe nature operates with regular, repeatable patterns because God is faithfully governing the universe and intelligently upholding those laws of physics. And we have this humility because we are limited and fallen. We have to check our theories against the data in the natural world. And of course, we're committed to service. We're called to heal the sick, feed the hungry, care for creation. There's this deep resonance. And the the reason that we see science as reliable as Christians is not because scientists are, not just because they're smart or virtuous, because scientists are committed to referencing the natural world. And people who are not Christians are still constantly referencing the natural world, which is God's creation, even if they do not acknowledge it as such. That's where the reliability comes from. We hold ourselves accountable to that. So there's this beautiful foundation in the Christian faith for how and why we do something. All right, let's talk about the hypocrisy thing a bit. Even more than logical arguments, people who are not Christians need to see faithful, authentic lives lived out. They need to see something different than what they see in the news. For any of you who work in a secular environment, science or not, you have amazing opportunity to live out an authentic faith that shows care. I was talking to Christian colleagues at MIT, where they have a Christian Study Center, and they hold these roundtable discussions where the Christian faculty will invite their colleagues to come in and talk about deep questions. So you get these top scientists from MIT and Harvard down the road, and they're coming to this discussion, and suddenly they're engaging in a thoughtful discussion about a contemporary issue with people who are Christians. Completely changes their view of faith. These are people who would never darken the door of a church or pick up a Christian book. And that's the kind of witness you can be in whatever profession you are working in. And then there's that slide I opened with, this belief that religion does more harm than good. Whew. We have a lot of work to do there to show that the church is doing good. People today aren't just asking, is it true? They're asking, is it good? So I visited Silicon Valley several times and met with the Christian leaders there. And you know what they do? So their emphasis in outreach is they say, show up. Be there in person to care for the poor. Be there to care for those who are hurting. Show the love of Jesus. Show up in person. And that is showing people how the church does good. It gives them a completely different picture of what the church is. Now, in addition to showing up in our faith, I think Christianity actually has something good to bring to the top questions being asked in the secular scientific and tech world. The ethical questions around all of the new technologies and discoveries are huge, and people are hungry for answers to these. And a theme that I see cutting across a lot of these is a need for a robust view of the significance of the human person. That is what so many of these questions come back to. And guess what? Judeo-Christian theology has amazing answers here of what that means for us. There's something positive that we can bring. And I want to give you a few examples, but first, two caveats. We have to remember plenty of non-religious people are highly ethical and working for ethics too. So you can never go in with an attitude like, well, I've got the ethics, you don't. And also, they need to hear it in voices of people who understand the technical side, preferably who are fellow experts in the field. So you can't just walk in and say, well, I think this. You have to know your stuff. Let me give you a couple of examples. So in my field, in the cosmos, the vast universe, some atheists will say, the universe is so vast, humans are so small, therefore they're insignificant. Well, the Christian answer to this is very different. Psalm 103 says, as high as the heavens are above the earth, referring to the vastness of the cosmos. And then it says, not how small humans are, but how great is God's love. Very different picture of what we are to draw from the universe. Now, in a pluralistic context, the argument I would make to them is, the question of significance goes beyond what science alone can say. We need what religion and philosophy have to say in these questions. And almost all religious and philosophical view would say significance is not based on physical size. So similarly, issues of evolution. So whatever you think about our origins, there are secular narratives here that we can respond to as Christians, where and they're talking about the close relationship between Homo sapiens and chimps and other great apes who have a very much similar history, similar physical properties and genetics. And some people will then say, oh, humans are just another animal. And Christians are like, no, that's not right. Because in our Christian worldview, we know that God has created us in his image. In a pluralistic terms, I would say that we're more than what we're made of. We're more than our physical description. What are those things that make us truly human? And worldview has beautiful answers on that. Our relationship to God as creator, the one who made us, our relationship to our fellow humans, our relationship to care and value the planet, all of that gives us this rich picture, which we can also bring to environmental questions. So there's some secular environmental narratives for years that's just been about save the endangered species, the cute endangered species. Well, they're cute, but they're also far away and very distant, and God calls us to care for them, but sometimes that doesn't resonate. Christians will, I think rightly ask, well, what is about the role for humans? And that has been missing in a lot of secular narratives. But there's some Christians who are really leading in this. Catherine Hayhoe and her work on climate change. She's a Christian, very open about her faith. The organization Plant with Purpose, they're both promoting solutions that will not only save species and reduce carbon, but also improve the livelihood of farmers, add jobs, improve children's health, bring flourishing for both the natural world and for humans at the same time. Then you have biotech and transhumanism, and the Christian ethics in medicine is already deeply influenced, ethics in general in medicine is deeply influenced by Christianity. But we have so many new technologies coming on and people wanting to do them to enhance ourselves, not just treat disease. We need some ways of deciding how to use these technologies. And again, the Christian worldview gives us ways of knowing what our purpose is, and that should shape those decisions. This is a link to a great talk by Francis Collins, already mentioned on this topic. And then there's AI and tech. This is obviously huge. It's impacting our lives in so many ways. And a lot of secular people are asking about, shouldn't we be having some regulation, something other than for-profit companies deciding the direction that we are going here? Yes, we should, but what should shape that? What should be the values shaping that? Well, Christian engineers for decades have been saying there should be design goals other than just profit and efficiency or human hubris. There should also be about justice and caring for others and promoting creativity, things that allow us to be more human, not less. Good technology allows us to do that. Okay, so that's a few examples there of narratives. Whoa, sorry, skipped ahead. My slides have gone a little crazy. So now I want to go the other direction, engaging those skeptical of science. So this is views of Americans on human evolution. Today, about 37% of Americans reject evolution of humans. They believe that God created humans in their present form about 10,000 years ago. That's dropped a bit in the last 15 years. It used to be around more 45%. Most of those people are shifting to the atheist view of humans developed without God, and that parallels the shift in American culture to people with no religious affiliation. That's the bottom row there, is the view of that humans developed without God. Now, on climate change, this survey broke down not by self-identified religion, but by religious behavior. So they have the high religious group here are people who say that they pray daily, they go to church weekly. Religion is very important in their lives. And that group, if you ask them, is the earth warming due to human activity, 33% will agree, versus the low religious behavior group, it's 70%. If you ask them, are stricter environmental regulations worth the cost? You have the highly religious group saying 49% and the low religious saying 77%. So big difference here tied to religious behavior. Do note, though, that's still half of highly religious people think that stricter environmental regulations are worth the cost. So this is not an uncommon view, but there's still this difference in that's tied to religious behavior. So what's causing this group to be more skeptical of science? Is it politics? Yes. It turns out on climate change, it's highly driven by politics. That is the biggest predictor of a person's view on climate change is their political affiliation. And as I mentioned earlier, religious identities for highly religious Americans are pretty closely tied to political identities. But somebody separated out these two factors. Ryan Burge in his research, he found that religion makes people even a bit more skeptical. So highly religious Republicans are even more opposed to climate change than, say, agnostic Republicans. So there's even a bit of religion going on there. It shows up too in vaccines. So this question asks parents about their behavior. Have you ever skipped or delayed an MMR or polio vaccine? Note that they are not asking about COVID vaccine. COVID vaccines are highly politicized, but it's impacting people's behavior on these standard childhood vaccines. So Democrats, only 8% said they had skipped or delayed, whereas Republicans said 22%. But then very religious white parents, people who self-identified as very religious and white, it's at 36%. So religion's yet another factor there. Okay, so what's going on in these concerns? How is this tied to religion? When you talk with people who have these concerns, they will be quoting scientific evidence. That's in their minds. And I have actually decided here not to try to give you the scientific evidence for these different topics, because what I've learned from the sociologists is that it's not the scientific evidence that's driving people's concern. They learn some scientific evidence and they'll quote that, but that's not what's driving it. And I want to talk about those drivers more. It's been really exciting to have psychology and sociology starting to engage these faith and science areas, because it's highlighted dynamics that other people in this field have missed. So one of their findings is that we tend to adopt the views of people around us. Jonathan Hill's study on human origins found that the most one of the two highest correlated features with views of human origins was the view of the church that you went to. That's what it was. Jonathan Haidt's groundbreaking work said that we make moral decisions based more on intuition than strategic reasoning. Now, I'm talking to a bunch of academics, and you're probably thinking, well, no, I use strategic reasoning. And yes, you do, and you're very good at that in your field where you've been trained to do that. But then I think of other areas in life, like how I choose to spend my money or how people choose to parent. These are kinds of things where, if you think about it, you go more on your gut feel, what people around you do, how you were raised. Most people in most situations are not doing a whole bunch of looking at all the evidence and making strategic reasoning. And for people who aren't scientists, that's usually how they're thinking about science, is kind of on that gut moral feel and what people around them think. So John Evans, in his book Morals, Not Knowledge, confirmed that in his survey work, he could show it's not about the scientific evidence, it's about people's religious and moral concerns. So let's talk about those. On the question of evolution, yes, biblical and theological concerns are forefront. They certainly were for me in my own journey. I grew up in a young earth creationist environment. That view made sense to me for many religious reasons. And I went through a whole journey on this. It was helpful when I read biblical scholars and theologians who could help me understand better and appreciate the Bible more deeply and what it was teaching in Genesis 1. It ended up driving me to love the Bible more. But it also showed me another option, a way that I could uphold the authority of Scripture and accept the evidence in God's creation that people were showing me for the great age of the universe and for evolution. And not all Christians are going to agree on this, but it's addressing those biblical and theological concerns are essential. That I found just by my experience that if you start with the scientific evidence, it doesn't change anybody's mind. People get more entrenched, and that's not where the conversation has to happen. And in my work at BioLogos, we saw a lot of people say that I'm a Christian today because of BioLogos. So at BioLogos has these common questions on science and biblical faith. That's a great place to learn more about it. And the book Origins that my husband Loren and I wrote, these lay out how that faithful option could work. Now, it's not just origins. It turns out on multiple issues, what religious people are looking for is to see God and humans in the narrative. And if you think of where you hear most presentations of scientific evidence, it's just religiously neutral, or sometimes it's anti-religious. But what religious people are looking for, this comes from Elaine Howard Eklund's work, and she says what religious people want to see, they care deeply about maintaining an active role for God in the world and protecting the idea that humans are created in the image of God and thus hold a special place in creation. This means that there's a great opportunity for scientists who are believers to be able to reframe for our fellow believers and show where God is at work and to show the special place for humans so that religious audiences can see that. And it turns out in that same survey on environmental topics, when they asked a question about God, they got a very different answer. They asked, do you agree that God gave humans a duty to protect and care for the earth, including plants and animals? 94% of highly religious people agreed. They're not opposed to caring for the planet. They see that as God's calling for us. And when they could see where God is in the picture, they were affirming that, and the role for humans as well. Now, highly religious people are disagreeing a whole lot on then what do we do about it? How serious are the problems, the public policy around it? But this core theology is something that we share. Okay, then there's moral and ethical concerns. And it's right to have some concerns here too, because science has not always been done good. 100 years ago, at the time of the Scopes trial about evolution, there were the top people who were promoting evolution were also promoting eugenics, social Darwinism, white supremacy. This was in the Tennessee textbook being debated. All of that was tied together. There's a lot of moral concerns there as well. And then you have the Tuskegee experiments, other times when science has been unethical. Now, today, we have intensive regulations on human experimentation, on the use of federal grant money. So a lot of the recent accusations that scientists are being unethical just don't hold up. But there are areas that I mentioned earlier about cutting-edge biotech, AI, where we do have ethical concerns that need to be addressed. Okay, and then there's concerns about biased elites. Anti-intellectualism is an American tradition. We can manage without those elites, and it gets tied into Protestant religion a lot. Today, it takes a form around politics. This question asks, scientific research on the health risks and benefits of childhood vaccines is influenced by the researchers' political leanings. And 55% of Americans said some or most of the time. I was surprised it was that high. What? Scientific research findings be influenced by the political leanings of the researchers. And for white evangelical Protestants, it was 73%. So they're right that surveys show that university profs and scientists are more likely to be Democratic and to donate to Democratic parties. So there's a difference. But does that influence their scientific findings? And here we have to be discerning. Yes, there are some scientists who push for a political agenda or religious agenda. That goes beyond the science itself. That's them speaking out beyond their area of expertise. Their opinion there doesn't matter more than anybody else's opinion. But when a scientist is speaking from their area of expertise, they have the knowledge, they have the accountability. Their scientific peers are not going to let them say stuff that is not backed up by science. And so that is much more reliable. You can't just discard their science just because you don't like their worldview. John Calvin said this 400 some years ago, all truth is from God. And consequently, if wicked men have said anything that is true and just, we ought not to reject it. Okay. Now, you get interesting challenges when you come to public health because that is a mix of scientific research and public policy. Ideally, we would agree on the research findings that are well established by the data, and then have a broader community discussion about the public policy that brings many voices to the table. How do we respond to this? We agree on this data, but how do we respond to it for our community? That did not happen during COVID, but that would be my take on the bias of beliefs. All right, anonymous institutions. This was the new one for me last year, the one I had missed and was not really on my radar. People are skeptical. And when we're talking about institutions, surveys will ask, what is your confidence in, say, the scientific community, medicine, education, major companies? Sometimes they ask about the federal government or universities. Gut feel. So what about you? You look at that list, do you get warm fuzzies? Like, yeah, those are good people? Or do you get like, ooh, I don't know. That's what this question is asking. What's your gut reaction? Well, most Americans do not have a great deal of confidence. They're better about science and medicine than other areas. Usually federal governments and universities are a bit lower on the list too. But all of these areas dropped during COVID. And COVID, I encourage you to read Francis Collins' book, The Road to Wisdom. He was leading the National Institutes of Health during COVID. He led the projects to develop the vaccines and to make sure they were well tested and safe and effective. But he also has regrets about how the science communication was done and has his own, expressing his own concerns about how can we move forward in this and rebuild some of the trust in institutions when there is good data to back things up. But what really was concerning people is that these institutions had power over them on issues like vaccines and climate change. And it's in power over our behavior and our very intimate choices about our health and our family. And the thing is, these institutions are anonymous. I'm indebted here to an analysis from Mills and St. Clair. Think of why you trust a small local business. Well, you know the people, and you can see how they operate, and they're networked with other people you trust in the community, and they share your community values, so you trust them. Major corporation, they don't know you, and you don't know them. You're a lot more suspicious of them, right? And that's how that anonymous bit is how most people felt about science. They didn't know the science institution, and suddenly this institution they had no reason to trust, no gut feel for trusting, was making these very demanding, hard to explain, hard to understand information and directives, very personal. You need to get this shot, it might impact you. And people felt like scientists were just doubling down on this stuff, and it made it very difficult. It was then amplified by a lot of voices trying to support science, but they use this narrative of trust the science. Those of you who are scientists, do you ever hear a fellow scientist say, trust the science? That's not how we talk. We say, this conclusion is based on this data with this degree of confidence and uncertainty. I mean, we don't say trust the science. And so this developed a whole thing of trust this anonymous institution that you have just blindly trust them. It was very hard for people to respond to that narrative. Now, I like science. I'm confident in it. I get warm fuzzies about science. But I realize that's because I know the people. I can see how they operate. They're networked with people I trust. They share my values. Of course I trust the scientific community. I know them. But most of America doesn't. And that's the difference. And so here's an opportunity for Christians who are working at these institutions to be that bridge of trust to communities that are skeptical, to be the face of the institution and try to rebuild some of that trust. Okay, I have a few words in closing here. How do we follow Christ then in today's debate? Well, Jesus Christ said, love your enemies. And that includes loving people you disagree with, have wrong and harmful ideas. And that's hard. What does love look like? It is patient, kind, it's not easily angered, does not dishonor others. We are to honor people who we think have false and harmful ideas. We're to understand them and better care for them. It rejoices with the truth. We don't have to abandon truth. But this is what Christ calls us to. Last year, there was a great conversation. Carrie McKeon is a mom in West Texas, and she wrote an article about the measles outbreak there last year. And afterwards, somebody from the CDC reached out to her. This was Jonathan Yoder. He's also a Christian, and he's the deputy director of the CDC's Division of Infectious Disease Readiness and Innovation. And he reached out to her and said, could we have a conversation? Could you set up something? And so in her living room, she gathered the CDC scientists, some vaccine skeptical moms, some local pediatricians. They were all Christian. They were kind, they were curious, they learned about each other, and at the end, they didn't change their minds, but they could see the other people as a person and not just a viewpoint. Carrie said that afterwards, when she would hear about the CDC in the news, she could text Dr. Yoder because she knew him and they were friends now. And Dr. Yoder, he encouraged the CDC in their work to not just emphasize vaccination, but also to do things like, how can you prevent measles? What symptoms should you look for? And other kinds of public health resources. So do you see what he did? He pursued a conversation across difference. He made an effort to reach out. They listened to understand, not just to respond. That can be very difficult, but if you make that change of mindset, that you're not there to try to change the other person's mind, but to understand them better, you get a very different kind of conversation. A great way to diffuse harsh conversations is to ask, why is this issue important to you? And people will take a step back and will say, oh, well, it's because of my kids, or it's because of this part of the Bible or something. And suddenly now you're talking about different stuff. And maybe it's something where you can have something in common and can build some sense of commonality. When it is your turn, research shows the power of stories. Tell your story. What is motivating your view, not just your argument. and that can help also diffuse tension. This book by the Colossian Forum is also a very good resource on it. So to sum up, if you are a Christian talking with science and tech-minded people who are skeptical of faith, live authentic, faithful lives. Show up for them. Show them that Christianity doesn't reject what they value most. Curiosity, seeking the truth in the natural world, service. These are things that Christianity supports. And from a place of expertise, you can show the relevance of Christian values, especially that robust view of human significance. If you accept the scientific evidence, the mainstream view of science, and you're talking with Christians skeptical of it, you can be that bridge of trust to anonymous institutions. You can address the biblical and moral concerns up front, show how Christianity gives a foundation for how and why we do science, and show that science doesn't reject what they value most, an active role for God and a special place for humans. Now, there's a lot of challenging issues facing our world today, not just science, and I want to end on a call for hope, because it's very tempting to fall into these other responses, like denial, wishful thinking, just pretending it's not happening, naive optimism. I see people doing that. Or apathy, just saying this isn't really that serious. That view is becoming more common among young people, I hear. Or despair. People say, like, yeah, I'm not denying it. It's really an issue. I'm trying to help, but it doesn't seem to be making a difference, and they're giving up. All three of these views lead to inaction and darkness. But Christian hope is so different. Jesus said, do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not be afraid. Do not despair. In this world, you will have trouble. So don't say it's not happening or not a big deal. But take heart, I have overcome the world. So this, my friends, is what active hope in Christ is. The belief that God is active, God sees, God knows, God cares, God is at work, and God will make all things new in the end. We are not on our own. And our response to that, how we live out that belief, is following God's commands and Christ's example, empowered by the Holy Spirit, to go into the world, make disciples, care for creation, work for justice, love your enemies, build community, sacrifice for those in need, follow Jesus Christ. And I'm telling you right now, it might not work. Okay? The world might keep getting worse. But we have this hope in Christ. We are not on our own. We can still be faithful and keep doing this work and we do it because we are following Jesus Christ. And that is my prayer for you, that you will keep being faithful. Thank you.